Solomon rested with his fathers and was buried in the city of David, his father, and Rehoboam, his son, reigned in his place. What does it mean that Solomon rested with his fathers? Did he just take a nap? Was he just tired, finished mowing the grass, shoveling the lawn? What do you think that means? He died. Very good. Very good. We have some great Old Testament scholars here among us who know the Hebrew very well. Rested with means died. Okay, that's what it means. And after he died, something interesting happened. He wasn't in charge anymore, and he couldn't manage things the way that he'd always managed things. And when he left his son, he did not train his son very well, and bad things happened after he passed away. You're familiar with this story, right? His son was Rehoboam. Rehoboam was supposed to be the ruler. That's the way that it worked in the olden days. We didn't get to elect who the next person is. The person who was the son of the king took over that role. But when Rehoboam became king, everybody started telling him how he should rule. Has that ever happened to you? You become the teacher, you become the superintendent, you become the boss, and all of a sudden, everybody has a word from the Lord for you about how to do things. Happens to pastors all the time, right? You've been here, new pastor shows up, everybody is there telling them, or even worse, a substitute teacher shows up in high school, and there's a line of students saying, yes, Mrs. So-and-so always lets us go to the library every single day, all time long, right? We all give advice. And so Rehoboam gets some advice, and the old guys come to him and say, hey, listen, everybody loved your daddy and all, but your dad was kind of rough on the taxes, and you really ought to lay off the taxes because the people are tired of taxes. That's what the old guys said. Rehoboam gathered the young guys around him, and the young guys said, hey, listen, if you don't take over and show everybody who's boss, you're going to be in real trouble. So what you need to do is to raise taxes to show everybody how tough you are. And oftentimes what happens to young people, who do they listen to, the older people or the younger people? Well, sometimes they listen to the younger people, decide to raise taxes, and guess what happens? The kingdom is divided over taxes. That sounds a little interesting, doesn't it? Some things just never change, do they? It's always death and taxes. But as a result of that, because Solomon didn't prepare his family to manage the inheritance that he was about to receive, the kingdom that David and Solomon had built, 12 tribes, power of the world at that time, is dissolved. 10 tribes go one direction, 2 tribes go the other direction. Those 10 tribes who followed the other one, we don't even know what happened to them anymore. Those are the 10 lost tribes. So why do I say all of that? I say all of that is because you can help your family today, long before you pass away, if you take the time and you spend a little bit of process of thinking, and you can do some amazing things to be helpful rather than unhelpful by not planning. How many of you in this room received an inheritance that was not well planned and not well thought out, and all of a sudden you got to be in charge of things and you tried to fix all of that? Anybody have that testimony? Okay, I see 1 or 2 in the room. Was it a wonderful experience for you to go through? She's shaking her head no. Because when you don't leave a plan, everybody else has a plan. The state has a plan. Your relatives that you don't really like have a plan. I know you don't have any difficult family members, but when you have a situation like this and you didn't have difficult family members and money becomes involved, guess what you develop? Difficult family members. And all of that goes to the court. All of that means you have to go to attorneys, and all of that becomes a challenge. And so what I'm here to do is to try to help you prepare for that day, just like we prepared for you on the spiritual side of things, to also prepare on the financial things as well. So here's the question that we always open up, and for those of you who fill in the blanks, this is fill in the blank number 1. Fill in the blank number 1. What do you have? All right, so this is the first thing that you've got to think about. And so this is, when you're making a plan, the first question that you have to ask is, what do I have? And here's what I run into all the time. People go, well, I don't have anything, right? In fact, many of you, that's the first thing you're thinking about. Well, I don't have anything. And yet I look around, and fortunately this morning, everyone that I look around and see is clothed. Thank you. We appreciate that very much, right? So we know that you at least have clothing, right, that you have. How many of you live inside of the church building? Okay, so you came here from someplace not here. So you have some place that you may own or you may rent or you may lease, but you had some place that you came from. And most of you did not walk probably here. So many of you already, very quickly, we have discovered, have some clothing. You have maybe a house or some kind of place that you partially own or have some kind of ownership of, or at least some kind of partnership with. You have some kind of vehicle, most of us have. And that's just scratching the surface, because probably if I go into the place that you live, you probably have stuff there. In fact, how many of you would just admit this morning, a Sunday morning, let the pastor see all this, that you have stuff? Would you just raise your hand and say, okay, you got stuff? How many of you have a stuffed drawer? Anybody have a stuffed drawer where it's that random drawer you put all of your stuff? How many of you have a stuffed building that you just kind of put stuff in there? Yeah, all right. How many of you are renting a place to put your stuff in a stuffed building someplace else? Okay, now we're getting a little too personalized, so I apologize for that. The pastor leave the room, then we'll get all that information. But we have stuff. And once you no longer are here, what's going to happen to your stuff? And your assumption is, oh, my kids will take care of it. My neighbors will take care of it. Or I don't care what happens to that. Well, some of that's a little easier than other things. For instance, somebody can come to your house and take your stuff, and normally the police don't show up and prevent that. But if you have anything in a bank, like an account, the banks don't just let anybody go and get whatever is there out of the bank in your name. Now, I know the times used to be that everybody knew you, knew the family, and you just go to the place and Bessie across the counter goes, oh yeah, I know your papa's son, go grab your stuff. Doesn't happen that way anymore. So if you've got bank accounts, then you need to figure out what's going to happen to that bank account and who's going to get them and how are they going to get them. The same thing is true for your retirement accounts. Now, there are ways to do this. There are sometimes called payable on death, or PODs, which you put somebody else's name on them to say if something happens to me, it's payable on death to this person. But you better make sure that you have that every time you open up a new account to make sure you got that information there. By the way, if you don't have that, but you have a family member's name on your account, you've just given them half of everything that's in that account, which may or may not be the best strategy for you. But do you have bank accounts? Do you have insurance proceeds from a life insurance policy? These can have ways of transferring information, but you've got to make a list of what do I have. Then property. Some of you have real estate. Some of you have personal property. Some of you have that collectible. Some of you got some Beanie Babies you still have in the closet. You're hoping they make a comeback, right? You're hoping they come back in value. Maybe they will, maybe they don't. But all of those things might have some value to them, and they might have a location that they need to go. And what you need to think about is, what do I have? The other things that have are interests. Maybe you got some business interests. Maybe you own some stocks. By the way, if you have debts, you own that too. And by the way, your debts just don't disappear because you pass away. Your debts actually transfer in many cases to family members. So you want to make sure that you have that. And some of you have children. Now, you're not really interested in your children, but we would call that an interest in your children. And if you don't have a plan to decide what you're going to do with them, the state has a plan on how to raise your children, who gets them. Well, I want them to go to so-and-so. Well, if you don't have that written down in a legally recognized method, the state will decide, and they do great with their tax money, so nothing to worry about your kids, right? Not a problem. You're in good shape. The other things that you have that you don't really realize are your passwords. This is really, really important, is it not? Passwords. Husbands, if your wives don't know where the passwords are, that's a problem on you. Right? I do most of our banking and most of our financial stuff, and I do it mostly from here. And it's mostly on my phone. Now, fortunately, I still have some younger children that can help us, but I'm saying, honey, before they take my body away, you're going to need my thumb. So make sure that you get my thumb, because that biometrics are going to be everything that I'm able to open up my phone with. So make sure you keep my thumb. Might need my eyeball at some point in the future in order to open all these kind of things. Otherwise, you're going to be in trouble, because we have to have our phone for everything, do we not? I have so many passwords that will text me to make sure that I'm the right person. But if I don't have my phone, then I'm in real trouble on that. In fact, we had one of our staff members who had their phone remotely wiped because of our software had a problem with it, because we're relatively secure, we try to be, and her phone got wiped. She was not real happy with us. And I will tell you, if my phone got wiped right now, I might be able to make it home. But that's about as far as I can go, right? I don't even know my kids' phone numbers anymore because it's just in here, right? My passports ideas are on here. My phone, my tickets for air flights, all this stuff is on here. So, do you have access to things that maybe the rest of your family don't have? You need a plan for that, and then processes. right? I've got a very sophisticated process to do my finances. My wife has no idea what it is. So I've written all that down. Here is an in case of death kind of a column. Here's a folder. Make sure you get this open and all that information is. The first thing you got to do is to figure out what do you have. Second thing you got to figure out is where do you want it to go? Where do you want it to go? So first thing you got to do is figure out, what do I have? You already said I don't have anything. I've tried to convince you you do have lots of things. Where do you want those things to go? Typically, you want these things to go to your spouse, typically, right? And the law allows for that oftentimes. But sometimes you have things that want to go to your children. Some of you don't like your children, so you want everything to go to your grandchildren, right? You can just skip that generation. Sometimes bad things happen, right? Others of you have friends or family. But there's also another category of things that you can send to, and that can be your church, to a charity, or to ministry. Because here's what you don't realize. Your giving, the church becomes dependent upon your giving. And when you pass away, your giving stops. And the church is damaged because of that. But it doesn't have to be that way. But you can think about, where do I want things to go? Typically spouse, then children, grandchildren. All these things are decisions that you have to make. By the way, the second page is filling in a lot of the details from the first page. Does that make sense to you? And so if you got the second page, there should be some information there that gives you a greater in-depth study on that topic, all right? So where do you want it to go? The third question is, how do you want it to get there? Here's what I talk to some people about. They go, well, hey, I've got a will. Great. Do you know what a will does? It sends your estate into the probate court. A will guarantees going to probate. And I have a couple of enemies in my life. Inflation is one of mine, and probate court is the other situation that I have. So here's two different ways that you can leave your estate. One is intestate, and the other is testate. All that means is that you have a last will and testament. That's all it means, okay? So if you don't have anything, what's going to happen is everything goes public, it moves slowly, and other people get to decide what happens, right? If you have a plan, a will and testament, and maybe even a trust, and we're going to talk about some of the documents that people need, it can go privately, quickly, and just family knowing. Now, I don't know about you, but I like my business private. That's what I like. Maybe you like to let everybody know. In fact, some of you have Facebook, and we know everything about you. We appreciate that. That's very nice of you to share. But some of us don't like that. Some of us don't like paying attorneys. Any attorneys in the house this morning? I'll just take real quick. Okay, so I got to make sure. All right, be very careful what I say now. The Lord loves attorneys, and we need the attorneys. And I'll stop right there, okay? But I've been in here's a situation. We had a gentleman pass away. I've been at the foundation for 7 years working for you. My first year there in December, we got notification that a man had passed away that July. He had a last will and testament that his kids didn't like and was not current, which means there were new laws that applied to it. Kids challenged that because he was leaving everything to ministry, and we're still in the court right today, 7 years later. So guess what's happened to all of his stuff in those 7 years? Guess who's going to get most of all his stuff in those 7 years? He had the right intention but didn't have the right plan. What plan do you have with your estate and your stuff? Where do you want it? How do you want it to get there? Do you want, and there's different ways to do this, there's something called an estate plan, and an estate plan provides you a set of documents that can include wills. Everyone needs a will. No matter who you are, you need a will. You also, some of you may need what's called a trust, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. But you can, in the state of Missouri, transfer a lot of assets outside of the probate court if you do it appropriately and properly. You can do a POD on accounts, payable on death. Very simple, which just says, I want a POD, here's my name, and a POD, and you put somebody else's name. Very simple, but you have to do that before you die. Make sense? Can't do it after you die. You have to do it before you die. You can also transfer other kind of assets, vehicles, for instance. It's a common place to put a TOD, a transfer on death. You name somebody on that. You can have beneficiary designations. You can say, for my insurance policy, I want it to go to these people. For this policy, I want it to go to that. Some things you can do that for, some things you can't do that. Transfer deeds, you can do that on your property, on your title. Say, this is going to transfer to this person. Again, be careful if you put somebody else's name on there while you're alive, because you've just given that portion away, but you can do that with a transfer, and some people may need a trust. And so these are all kinds of plans that help you legally to get there. Let me just explain a trust real quickly, and then we'll talk more about this if you have interest. Again, if you have questions, you can always talk to me in between the services, and then that green sheet that I've asked you to fill out, you can write your questions down, and I will get back to you if you have questions about that. What is a trust? A trust is a legal organization that you form with yourself. That's all it is. And you name yourself as a trustee. And then you name what's called a successor trustee, which I'll get to in just a moment, so that once one trustee passes away, the successor trustee takes over, and it's as if that person never passed away. It avoids having to go through the probate process as I've described it so far. So let's keep moving, and I'll come back to that. Who do you trust to get it there? Some big decisions you have to make, because you're not going to be able to enforce all these things, so you have to trust somebody. If you have a will, it's a personal representative. Has anybody ever served as a personal representative in this room? Sometimes it's called an executor, several hands around the room. Is that a fun process? Did you enjoy that? Do you want to do that for a living? No indication of doing that. But that's one thing to do. Or you can be a trustee, and a trustee is someone who takes over from the original trustee, and they're responsible for everything. But there's a question: what happens if something happens to them? We run into this all the time. We had these sweet 3 little old ladies. I think they were almost the Golden Girls, and they were up in northeast Missouri, and none of them had any kids. None of them ever got married, and they had a plan. The plan was they were going to take care of each other. That's a pretty good plan. Until what? Until there's only one left. And then who's going to take care of her? And so you need to figure out, who do you trust to make all these decisions for you? You can name a successor personal representative or a successor trustee. What does that mean? I'm going to name one person and then name somebody else. I read wills all the time from people, and they've got their parents listed. Well, that's nice when you're 18, but when you're about 75, probably not the best thing to name your parents as your personal representative or your trustee. So you got to name somebody else. You got to name a successor to that. Better yet, you can name a corporate representative or a corporate trustee. And if you had charitable intent in your estate, then you can actually name the Missouri Baptist Foundation. We can serve as your personal representative. We can serve as your trustee if you have charitable intent. And here's the good news. Neil is going to die. Foundation's not going to die, right? If you name a person, that person's probably going to die at some point. And if you've not updated your will, then you're going to have the same kind of trouble, because if there's no one decided, guess where that goes? Goes back to the court system, and the court takes their time, charge attorney's fees, and you can't do what you want to do. So having a corporate representative is a pretty amazing thing. In fact, just recently we had a gentleman who passed away unexpectedly, and literally we walk in and take over and make all the decisions, begin to liquidate the property based upon his rules and what he wanted to do, and because he had left much of his resources to ministry purposes. So that's one of the things you've got to figure out. So questions: what do I have? Where do you want it to go? Who do you trust to get it there? Here's the next question, though. What happens if something happens before you pass away? Do you realize that your will only works when you're dead? And the research says, the statistics say, that many of us are going to be incapacitated before we pass away for some period of time. And that's where you need another set of documents to provide people the authority to act on your behalf. We talk about the 4 documents that everybody needs in addition to a will, which would be a 5th document. So everybody needs 5 documents legally. No matter after you're 18, you need all 5 documents, and some of you may need a 6th one, a trust, based upon your circumstances. Here's what everybody needs. Everybody needs a medical power of attorney. Everybody needs a financial power of attorney. Everybody needs an advanced medical directive. And everybody needs a HIPAA authorization. Let me walk through those. What is a power of attorney? Well, a power of attorney is granting somebody the right to act on your behalf. There's a couple of ways to do that. One of those is called a durable power of attorney, which means when you sign that document, that person can act as if they are you immediately without any other circumstances happening. Another one is called a springing power of attorney, and that means something has to happen before they can act on your behalf. The springing power of attorney means that if I'm injured or incapacitated, that a medical doctor, 1 or 2 you specify, has to say yes, they are no longer capable temporarily or permanently, based upon the circumstances, to act, and now their power of attorney can act for them. The other one is what's called a durable power of attorney. You want to make sure you trust the person with the durable power of attorney, because you have just granted them the authority to do for you anything that they want to do based upon the documents. I'm going home this afternoon to go see my daddy. He's 88 years old, lives on by himself, and I have a durable power of attorney on him right now on my phone, which means if something happens to him, I can go make any decision that's lined out, and we've got it very specifically lined out on the financial side and on the medical side, that I can do whatever I need to do in case something were to happen to him. Now, my wife has one of those for me, so you want to make sure your marriage is strong before you sign a durable power of attorney, and so you might have a pastoral guidance on that to say, no, you probably shouldn't do that. It should be springing instead of durable. But this allows you to sign paperwork, make decisions, all within the authority of what that power of attorney is, okay? So I would almost ask everybody, every head bowed, every eye closed, raise your hand if you have a power of attorney, but I don't want to do that. But if you don't have one, you need one, right? Get one. Those things are really important. What's an advanced medical directive? Advanced medical directive is a living will, but I don't use the term living will because it gets confusing with a will. And so a living will is the same thing as advanced medical directive. It allows you to identify, this is what I want to have happen under these circumstances, but not every circumstance can be covered, which is why you need a medical power of attorney. So the financial power of attorney makes financial decisions for you. Medical power of attorney makes medical decisions for you. And you may want to name different children for different aspects of that, mightn't you? Right? You may have a child that's not very good with money. I call those IACs, irresponsible adult children is what I call them. And I know none of you have any of those out there, but how many of you know people who have an irresponsible adult child? Okay, you're not even playing anymore. You're not even listening to me at this point. That's fine. I don't mind talking. I talk to myself all the time. It's okay. But you know there are some children that you probably shouldn't leave $1 million to. Even if you had it, you probably shouldn't leave it to them because it'd be gone. But then you have another child that can handle the finances, but you don't want them making the decisions for you medically, do you? Because they're like, nope, they just look sick. Let's unplug everything right now, right? We're not going to be involved in that. So it may not be the same child doing the same thing, but you need somebody to do that, right? And then, of course, the HIPAA authorization just allows a person to get information about you or for you in the circumstances. Because these documents work before you pass away, because a will doesn't work until you pass away. So you need something before you pass away in case you're incapacitated. Then you may need something after you passed away to make those decisions. Okay, does that make sense? Any questions at this point? I allowed you to ask questions. And so, okay, I'll keep going, and then there'll be some time for questions. But the final question is, what if you could do more? What if you could do more? What do I mean by that? Well, you have the opportunity, if you wanted to, that when you built your estate plan, that you could leave something to a ministry that you've supported. My parents were both educators. My mom has passed away about 6 years ago. And if you are school teachers in retirement, you're doing really well, are you not? Because you had that defined benefit package. In fact, my dad's 88, and he's making more every month than he ever did while he was actually working for the State Department of Arkansas, State Department of Education in Arkansas. And yes, Arkansas does have a State Department of Education, just in case there's questions out there. They do. And so he's making more money than he ever did while he was working because he has this benefit package. But when my mom passed away, his income got cut in half. And he had to go to his pastor and say, Pastor, I've got to cut my tithing in half because my income is cut in half. And that almost broke his heart. And it was, well, Dad, we could have thought about this and made a plan before all of this happened. The other thing that you can do is that I have 2 boys, and we didn't have a girl because a girl would have gotten anything she wanted out of me. And so my boys, bread and water, they're fine. But if I'd had a daughter and she wanted a pony, no, we're getting a flock of ponies, honey. Whatever it is that you want to get, we're going to get a bunch. And so the Lord didn't give me any daughters, but in my passing, I could actually have a daughter named Charity. And instead of dividing my estate into half, I can divide it into thirds and leave a third of my estate in the name of charity to all the ministries that I've supported. And that's a possibility. The other thing that you can do, which is actually kind of cool, is that you don't actually have to leave everything at one moment. Not all of your assets have to be distributed immediately upon your passing. In fact, after you've passed away, time is no longer an issue for you, and actually you could invest that over time, and you could actually give your estate twice by investing it, giving your children a portion of that on an annual basis, Rather than giving them $500,000 all at once, because they might not benefit from that, but you could give them $10,000 for 5 years, or $5,000 for whatever 5 times 50 is, 10 years, I suppose, and let that money invest during that same period of time until it doubles, and your children would have gotten everything that you would have given if you passed away, but also you'd have doubled your money, and a ministry could benefit from that. Those are pretty interesting tools called Charitable Remainder Unit Trust, Charitable Annuity Trust, all kinds of cool things that can happen. But you can actually start doing that today through what's called a donor-advised fund. And so if you don't have a donor-advised fund, it is a way that you can actually start creating your own endowment. One of the things, and I'll talk about it in the service in just a little bit, I will talk about the idea that you can actually leave money from your estate to do good after you passed away. Historically, we've called that an endowment. I call that a future fund. And I'm encouraging churches to consider having a future fund that people could leave something from their estate to the church so that ministry might happen in the future. Because here's what I know. A lot of people don't think about blessing their church after they've passed. And a lot of people don't understand the needs that a church has. And typically a future fund that a church develops, usually it covers ministry, maintenance, or missions. Usually are those 3 things that people can leave assets to. When I pastored First Baptist Church Branson, we had a woman leave some money to the church, and we bought big buses, school bus type things, so that we could drive our students around. And we called one Arlene, and we called the other one Carpenter, because her name was Arlene Carpenter. And so she left something in her name that every time we went on a youth trip for years and years and years, that we're named after her. You could do the same thing about this facility. You can name it about missions for this church. You can do some things and actually start that, which is called an endowment, a future fund, through actually giving to a donor-advised fund today. Basically, a donor-advised fund today is something that you would leave money to on an annual basis or a monthly basis, and instead of you writing checks to all the ministries that you believe in, you can actually create a donor-advised fund, and your donor-advised fund writes all those checks. And they can manage all those things for you. You can actually invest it over time. It can grow. We had a family that wanted to leave $1 million when they passed away. They didn't have $1 million, but over the years, they left money, and that money increased so that when they passed away, they actually left $1.1 million to a ministry that they believed in. So there's all kind of tools, all kind of strategies, all kind of things that can be beneficial. So here's a couple of things that I'm looking for. One of the things that I'm looking for is I'm trying to build an army as I travel across the state of Missouri for people who are interested in leaving 10% of their estate to their church or to another ministry. And so if you've never thought about this being an idea because you don't have an estate plan but you want one, or you never thought this was possible, then I want to create a whole network of people who believe in this. And so one of the things you can do, once you finish filling this out today, and again, I'm going to ask that everybody fill this out so I can take it to my boss and say, hey, boss, I did something this weekend. I just didn't eat at Culver's and charge the foundation, although I did eat at Culver's and charge the foundation. But I did that because I came here because you didn't have a Raising Cane's close enough to where I was last night. That's number 1 on my list, but that's okay. But you want to say here that I want to learn more about joining the 10 for 10 because I'm running across people who've been generous in their lives, and they want to be generous in their passing. There was recently an article from the Crowder family, not the Crowder band guy, but Dennis Crowder, who's done this, and we want to try to raise that up. The second thing here that I want to talk to people who don't have a family and kingdom plan, or they're not living a confident financial life, but they want to. Because we've got some relationships and connections with people that will help you at a discount to have those plans put together. So if that's you, I want you to mark that box. And then there's a fun topic of me that I'm always focused on, and that is the business of ministry. I love talking about how if a nonprofit makes no profit, do you know what you call it? You call it closed, is what you call it, right? A nonprofit that makes no profit is called closed. And so I know there are church people who are concerned about church finances, and I want to build a network and a kingdom of those people to discuss best plans. So if that's you, I want you on the back to say, I'm interested in church finance or church financial planning. And then if you have any questions on the back, I want to talk to you about those kind of things. Now, this is a topic of estate planning that's a pretty significant topic. This is the book that I could bring and we could all study together. today about all those things about estate planning. Didn't think you wanted to do that today, but we can talk about that if you've got questions. There's other things that this is really just the beginning for. One of those things is something called a special needs trust. My brother has Parkinson's. He's 9 years older than I am. My dad's 88 years of age. More than likely, I'm going to be helping my brother out. So what my dad decided to do is to create a special needs trust where he was able to leave my brother's inheritance, or most of it, into a fund, into a separate trust that I will be managing on his behalf, that I'm able to help him throughout the rest of his life take care of all kinds of different needs, but it never impacts his ability or his concern for losing disability. Right? You know some people that if they got too much money, they'd be off of disability. Well, the way that you solve that is you create a special needs trust, and that allows me to take care of his needs. I can do all kind of interesting things. I can buy him a new television if I want to, because that can help him see better. I can send him on a trip to Ireland if I want to go see the family roots and all those kind of things. But it doesn't count as circumstances or finances for him. So if you have a special needs child, for whatever circumstances or some kind of medical issues, there's ways that you can create this. Tax planning is also pretty instrumental, especially if you sell a farm, sell a business, and all of a sudden you make a lot of money in 1 year and you don't know what to do with that. There's lots of different options that you have to make sure that that is beneficial to the places that you want to be beneficial. In addition to that, sometimes a second marriage or a third marriage doesn't go really well, and we're going to try to figure out whose is what. Well, that's my daddy's. Well, no, that's the stepmother's, all that other kind of stuff, and all kinds of other topics that are available. A couple of things for you to know. Next steps. I am not an attorney, nor do I practice law, but there are attorneys out there that do that. And so we've got some connections with a couple of guys. That'll be the next slide up here, named Gon and Keneally. These are guys that we don't recommend, but we have a relationship with. They can do everything online through Zoom calls, all the other kind of stuff. They are in Kansas City. You've got a great estate planning attorney down in this area. Again, I'm not recommending any attorneys. I'm just saying these are people that we have worked with in the past, named David Healy. Both of those sets of attorneys are expensive, but they're good at what they do. So if you're going to spend a lot of money, don't you want a good product after that? Now, you can do a lot of these things on your own as well, but just really be careful, because if you're expert, maybe you might need more expertise. So let's go to that next slide, and let me see if there's any questions that we have in the big group setting that you want to ask about any of the things that I've talked about. What questions do you have? Yes, ma'am. It does not if they are properly executed. And so I messed that answer up, because here's my answer that I always answer. It depends, okay? Because that's what my attorneys have trained me to say. It depends. If you have those properly drawn up, those items will not go into probate. If you have less than, I think in the state of Missouri, I think it's $35,000 in total assets, that's non-probatable. But if you have anything more than $35,000, there are certain things that do have to go through probate. If you write them appropriately, a lot of things can avoid it, but you got to make sure you do that. My dad, working on his estate, my dad was talking to a financial advisor years ago, and the financial advisor said, "Well, I can double your money." And my dad said, "Well, ain't nobody can double my money, so no." And I'm just like, "Well, Dad, did you ask him how long it would take him to double your money?" Because if he said overnight, then you probably shouldn't listen to him. But if he said 7 years, then you should have said yes. And so what my dad did is put everything in CDs. And so I'm not getting much of inheritance. It's like I could have, or what he should have done for all those years. But we went to all this work to get the trust built. And he was so excited that we were done, but he had not put any of the CDs in the proper name of the trust. And so we had to work on that. Because you can have a trust, but things have to be properly titled to be in the trust, lest the trust not be able to cover them. But if you properly do your PODs and TODs, if you properly do your transfer deeds, then those will not be probatable. Yes, sir.
You had mentioned that some of the forms were
That's a great question. Make sure you get a pen back there, because that's a great question. I should have brought something nicer for you. I recommend about every 5 years is what I recommend. And you don't have to go a deep dive into that, but every 5 years. And on that particular case, it was very simple. It was in the 1980s that he wrote it. And at that time, you only had to have one witness. And the state of Missouri changed the law to 2 witnesses, and the kids challenged that. And they couldn't challenge anything else, but they challenged that and kept it in court for those years. So I recommend about every 5 years to review it. It is time for mine to be reviewed again. And so this is something you kind of need to constantly happen, because things change over time, don't they? But my recommendation is about every 5 years, really no later than 7, just because there are new laws that can come into effect. But more than that, circumstances change, right? Circumstances change. Great question. Thank you. The first question was a great question too, by the way. But any other questions that you have? Any other questions about this? Yes, ma'am. Okay. It depends. First question, I was always going to say that because there's several nuances in there, and I'm not an attorney, so I cannot provide legal advice in a large forum or in a private setting. But I think that you can ask those questions of the people that you're signing the paperwork for, and they'll be helpful for you. If you ever have any concerns, I would consult an attorney on that. But it depends on how he's signing. Is he signing just as the agent? And under what circumstances he's signing an agent? If it is a durable power of attorney, and he doesn't have the financial power, there may be some question and concern on that. I'm just not able to give legal advice on that because of the technical nature of that question. I wish I could. We can probably talk afterwards, but I can't provide, I'm not an attorney, so I can't give legal advice on that. So if you have a concern or question, consult an attorney and pay them $700 an hour to answer a simple question that all of us should be able to answer. A little commentary on that, though. I didn't answer that. But great question. Those are the kind of questions you need to be asking. Other questions? Okay, so here's what I'm going to ask you to do then. I'm going to be around. I'm going to preach a sermon. By the way, if you don't have an estate plan, we're happy to give you a discount on one. That's only a $500 discount. Trusts are going to be in the $5,000 to $7,000 range for a full trust. Will packets are going to be probably a couple of $1,000s. You can go online and get something. Sometimes something is better than nothing, but sometimes nothing is better than nothing. It just depends. It's a lot of money to do that. I get it. But we can give you a $500 discount because I offer that across the state, but you need to talk to me about that, okay? So what I really would ask you to do is please fill this in. Please fill this in. Even if you don't want me to bother you, please fill it in so I can take it back. And by the way, if you notice that they're miscut, it's because I cut them myself, okay? So don't blame my staff on that. That was the president been cutting the paper instead of trusting the professionals to do that. So sorry about that offset. Please fill that out. If you're interested in knowing more about this community that I'm trying to build on the 10 for 10, people who are trying to leave something in their state to advance the gospel, please let me know that, mark that. If you're interested in knowing I need some information, at my table out in the foyer, I've got some samples of some documents. If you don't have powers of attorney, the Missouri Bar actually produces documents that allow you to draw up powers of attorney on your own. And so I've got some documents out there. If you're interested in that, tell me what you need on the back of your paperwork, and we will get that mailed to you or emailed to you. I just don't bring thousands of copies with me like I used to when I travel, okay? So if you've got information about that, let me know. If you want to know more information about those things, and that if you are the church financial person or you're concerned about church finances, put that on there as well, and I'll be happy to help you. Okay, so we've got about a 30-minute break for a worship service. Coming back in here, I'm going to preach on money, so we're going to talk about money. Again, don't leave. I'm not trying to get your money. I'm going to tell you the lies that money tells you, and there's a chance I may pass out something for a couple of special people who participate in the sermon with me in just a little bit, okay? So let me pray for you. I'll be back at the booth, or I'll be up front here if you have any questions. If you want any of that information that I have, most of what I have is out there is samples. If it says sample on it, that's what it is. But please write down whatever information that you want, and I'll be happy to get it. Did anybody think this was even partially helpful to you today? Please encourage me. Okay, thank you very much. All right. And we're here to help. As I'm going to tell you in the second service, I work for you, and we're here to help you in whatever way that we can. Let me pray for you, and then we're actually done a little bit early. Don't count on that for church service, though, okay? All right, let's pray. Father, we thank you that you're so good to us, and you've got a plan for us, and we're so thankful that a plan was set into motion long before we needed it. And that plan was to redeem us by sending your own Son to pay the price for our sin. And Father, we are so thankful of that, and we want to give our lives telling other people about that important message. And in 200 years from now, that message is going to be more important to us than it even is now. So Father, would you help us to do something today that will leave a legacy so that others who come behind us might find out about the gospel because of something that we did. Father, I'm so thankful for this church and the ministry that they have to each other and the ministry they have to this community. May this be a great day of worship of you as we try to figure out how to live a confident life in the world in which we've called. And we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you very much. We'll see you in about 30 minutes.